Right, hi everybody, and welcome to Guest Safety Officers Season 2, Episode 6. It is 6. That's what we're going with. And today, Gary is, of course, still here in Season 2. Who'd have thought that would have ever happened? And of course, I'm really pleased to have back onto the show um, Professor Keith Still Professor Keith to tell us all about the year in crowd management science or crowd science. I never quite get that right. So Gary, quick hello from yourself.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Keith.
There you go.
Hi there.
That's enough from him. And Keith, let's
Well,
crack
firstly, I
on with
guess
you.
Happy New Year to you all. I mean,
Oh, yeah, we did that. We did that ages ago. But thanks, Keith, for
well, that's
reminding us that
some of
we're rude.
yeah.
And apologies for not saying Happy New Year. But, we're chuffed to bits to see you. Anyway, enough dribble from me. Let's, first of all, Keith, and Gary's going to obviously ask a couple of questions shortly, but can you just tell us, because the last time we met, you had your app, the CrowdScan app had just gone basically onto the market. Tell us what's happened.
Well, we've had a lot of interest in documentation, books, information about how do we use it, how do we make spaces safe, and of course, with litigation for Astroworld and Brixton O2, we're still very much aware that there is a significant risk to life and limb in any crowded space. So if you look at something like Cookstown, which is only 600 kids queuing for a nightclub and three fatalities, Brixton, two fatalities there, and Astroworld, 10 fatalities. If we look at the Itaewon disaster, so there's been a focus now on what causes accidents and incidents, and that really is what crowd science is about. You've got crowd safety management, but the flip side of that is risk assessment. How do we assess the dynamics of risk in a crowd? People are tuning now into, hey, hang on a second. We didn't realize there's a science to this. We thought, you just get in there and you push the crowd in a direction and they'll do what they're told. But as you know, post-COVID, three things have happened. We've got a crowd that have never been at events before, this new generation coming through. We lost a lot of the skills due to the fact that the COVID years meant that people were finding alternative work and didn't come back because of the transient nature of events and zero contract hour things. And we had the crowds themselves, the COVID cautious, the contentious, I'm not going to do your rules anymore, and just the celebratory, let's have the mother of all parties, and therefore they become too exuberant. So with those three combinations, crowd dynamics has changed significantly. And what it means is that, these tools are becoming much more relevant and important to understand both behavior and safety. So with the rise in crowds coming back, the Itaewon disaster, 156 deaths there, suddenly realizing that any space that becomes overcrowded can become a significant risk to life and limb. And what does that mean to our event? With Cookstown 2019, with just a small crowd queuing for a nightclub, resulting in three fatalities. Can that happen in my space? These are questions I get asked all the time. Is how do I evaluate risk for an environment that is changing? It doesn't just fit your brief description and a number in your current risk assessment model. I need to understand a little bit more about this in order to make sure that, we don't have an accident and incident on my site. So I think litigation, the high profile nature of that, the fact that people are tuning in that, crowd science does exist. We have been teaching it for 30 odd years. And I run courses now. We've got franchise trainers just about to develop in Saudi. We've got trainers out in Hong Kong. We've got trainers now in Australia, Holland, Belgium, USA, and Canada. And of course, I teach in the UK. So it's finally coming of age, I think, where people are realizing there's a little bit more to this, and I don't want to be in a court of law, grabbing that bar, trying to defend myself by saying, well, it's never happened before, or we've always done it this way. It's just no longer a defense. So now that people are aware that there is a science, that there is a methodology to assess risk in built and complex spaces, that crowds themselves are dynamic in nature, and therefore the current risk assessment doesn't necessarily fit. It's not fit for its intended purpose. And that you can't do as you do in other engineering standards. You want to test a structure, you test it to destruction. You now know what its limits are. You can't do that with a crowd. So you need a better methodology to understand risk before the crowd enters that space.
Yeah, just before I ask, before I go, sorry, Gary, but I just want to ask one question there. Do you think there's been a shift over the last year, or there should be? There's something Gary and I have been speaking about. I think about that we need to start seeing a transition from compliance to competence. You know.
Yeah, I mean, when I was asked to look at, well, one of many advisors on the Safety at Sports Ground Authority's latest edition for, the Green Guide, we focused very much on this word competency. What makes a competent safety manager? It's not somebody that can read the document, somebody that can read, understand, and apply. So, there's a certain numerical standard. And the thing that I find is that although you can't be a successful crowd manager without experience, and I can always train somebody to be more scientific in their approach, but I can't compensate for the experience. Experience alone is not a good teacher. You learn from mistakes. You make a mistake in a crowd and people get injured. So, experiential learning generally means that you know a mistake when you make it again. And experience comes from judgment, and judgment usually comes from bad experiences. So experiential learning, I think, is a really dangerous single-minded attitude. I'm an experienced crowd manager, therefore I know what to do. The example I use is experiential learning can probably be summed up by a person who's explaining risk. I've got a mobile phone. When I use it in this hand when I'm driving, which is illegal and dangerous in every country that I've talked about, when I've used it in this hand, never had an accident. But the one time I used it in this hand, nearly ran somebody over. Therefore, this is safe and this is dangerous. You see, that's experiential learning in a nutshell, is that that's my experience, and therefore that must be the rule that applies to all. It's nothing to do with the fact that distracted driving is the cause of accidents, and using any mechanical or electromechanical or mobile device is distracting you from the function of half a ton of steel going at 60, 70 miles an hour down a busy road. Yeah. So it's distracted driving is the cause. But my experience is that this was safe and this was dangerous. You see, that's where a crowd manager will say, I've done the following things and I've never had an accident, therefore it must be a safe thing to do. And it's that flawed logic that we find so damnable, particularly when people are trying to teach it. My experience is therefore much more superior without any scientific underlying basis to understand risk, causality, or how close you might be to, a fatal incident. And I'm sure you've all got experiences of this. I mean, I talked to the University of Essex yesterday. I just asked the class of students, how many people here have been in an environment where you've not had control over your movement, where felt you've been pushed off your feet? And every single hand went up. And those are high-risk environments in crowded spaces. Any trip, slip, and fall in that environment is a significant risk to life and limb. It's understanding why, how, density, flow, how do we keep those spaces safe is science. Experience is, hey, I had a risk, but I wasn't killed. Therefore, it must be okay. And that's the real difference between experiential learning and a scientific basis behind things.
Gary?
Thanks, Keith. On that point, there's a couple of things which have come up in my way the last few months. We got crowd science, but I've been working with a few clients, and they come back to me with their fire evacuation procedure, which has been laid out by let's say one of the fire brigades, and they don't quite understand crowd science because they've got the idea they can evacuate. I haven't got the paperwork in front of me, forgive me, but you've got so many people who can evacuate within certain times, and that means we can have that many people in this confined space. And I'm going, well, yeah, it's true, but you're not looking at the bigger picture moving out, what's happening beside the other side of that door. And they get stuck in this rut, and they're convinced and telling me they are right because the fire brigade has said this is correct. And it's one of the things that is driving me insane at the moment, especially one of my clients. and I'm saying this is not right. And yes, as you said, nothing's happened so far, but you've got to start putting in, your risk assessment, and you've got to put plans into play to stop this from happening. So that's one of my things. And how are you coping, or are you finding the same thing with the fire brigade or anything like that?
Um, Funnily enough, we recently had discussions about how to rewrite the Home Office fire codes to be a little bit more specific on density and flow. Um, the Jonathan Syme, the late Jonathan Syme, did some fantastic work in the psychology of this, and he understood that the fire codes are optimal, the best case scenario. If everybody leaves at once, if the fire alarm goes and they all leave immediately, you just need to ask your client, is that reality? Do people immediately respond to an emergency situation, or do they stand around and look and try to figure out what to do? And it's that behavioral element that isn't in the code. The code assumes that if everybody's leaving at once and they're all behaving in an orderly manner, and you've got space beyond the door for that crowd to decant, and they're not looking at big fire engines coming in and dealing with a situation, they're not rubbernegging, they're not spectating, then that's human behavior. Fire code is just merely the mechanics of moving people from A to B, and mechanics is not enough. So whenever we talk to clients on this, it's always a question of saying, well, okay, but what are your fire alarms? For instance, if all you have is a fire alarm and you now have a suspect package on your main fire exit, how do you inform the crowd to go out that way? So what is your process and procedure in play? Because according to the building code, a fire alarm should be enough to evacuate a building. But the big difference here is they are called fire codes. So the assumption of a fire. It's not the only emergency you're dealing with. It could be a medical emergency, it could be an evac situation, it could be somebody loose with malicious intent, it could be a knife attack, it could be a suspect package. There are a whole range and raft of emergencies you need to facilitate within your event plan that are not just the fire code. So what else might go wrong on a site that you're going to need to include in your crowd safety, crowd management plan? That's where you, Gary, come in as an expert. You've got that range of experience that says it's not just fire we're dealing with. And that's what I always go back to the clients with. Whether fire's your only concern, yeah, sure, stick with the building code, and we'll see you in court if something goes wrong because you didn't take the advice that you need to look beyond fire. And I think that's the real weapon in your arsenal when you're talking to clients, is that if something does go wrong and all you've done is rely on the fire code, was your event, your site fit for its intended purpose?
I think that actually, and I'm going to refer back to the Manchester Arena inquiry now, in terms of, in the evidence, it was said that had we known 2 minutes earlier or whatever, they got a thing, that the building would have been emptied. And that I know from practical experience of dealing with things like this, that's rubbish. There is no way that anybody would turn around and immediately stop, evacuate a show or do things just on the basis of a individual, low-ranking thing. Somebody would have to go and further investigate. That is
Yeah.
what would happen. That would be the practical application of that. Nobody would make that decision. So, I've found that quite, and as you say, that is anticipating that everybody does exactly what they're going to do on that moment in time, aren't they? Right, we're all out of here. Not
Yeah.
going to happen.
And if you look at that specific example, there could easily have been a process in place. We've got a suspicious activity in this area. Let's close those fire exits and have everybody go out alternate routes. The building has sufficient egress around the rest of the egress points to avoid moving people into an area where I don't know what's happening. It looks suspicious. Let's take a precaution, close those doors and evacuate elsewhere. So I think that 2 minute warning could have made the difference between procedure A or procedure B. But you have to have these alternate plans thought through before the event occurs.
And you have to be certain, Keith, that what the person who's telling you is saying it's not about whether or not you empower someone.
Hmm.
It's about my judgment as somebody who's in charge of an event, etc., to say, am I going to do this? Am I going to make this call without checking? And I just think it would be perfectly normal if I would come, if for instance, I would come to you, wouldn't we? We go, Keith's there, he's on site. Keith, what should we do? And you've then got to make that decision straight away on the basis of very, very limited information. And I think that sometimes, I know in hindsight, we all know what happened,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we didn't know at the time. Anyway, Gary, sorry.
It's a brilliant point, but one thing we're missing out on this thing is as well training,
Yeah.
training the staff. I mean, I'm looking at the situation with my wife's company, SSMRT, at the moment. We've got an influx of new staff. They're all wet behind the ears. We currently send them away. We sent 6 away so far to be trained up doing FREC free. But looking at principles of what we said earlier is we've got an influx of all these fresh staff who've got no idea about fire evacuation or even evacuation at all. And this is where one of the biggest issue lies. And again, it falls back on the venue operators who don't want to pay for this extra training, because it becomes a money, it's an added expense. They don't want the added expense because they're already being taxed, already the VAT is high, they're paying for electricity, and that added expense of bringing the whole team in to do an evacuation, it goes out the window. But the bigger picture is, it may have not gone wrong, but if it does go wrong, what did you do to prevent that? This is one of the things I'm having arguments with all the time with a number of clients at the moment, which is, yeah, well, if it happens, it happens. Well, it won't, because, what doors they're going to go through. I.e., you go back to the Manchester Arena. If they had that 2 minute, were the staff experienced to send everyone out the right way?
Mm.
It's a constant training exercise which needs to be done continuously.
Well, I mean, one of the tools that we recently developed and deployed was a basic risk awareness, risk reporting process, but to make it site specific. I mean, the thing is with the generic courses is that you can often find, how do I apply it to this part of the site? So what we did is we used the technology available on your mobile phone, is we get the client to take photographs of his site area, and nobody works the site, specifically big sporting venues out in Hong Kong. Nobody's allowed to work the site unless they've passed a basic risk awareness, risk reporting. Very low cost, but site specific. Where's this location? What do you see? What do you say to your supervisor? So I could take the photograph, and we've developed a tool that allows me. I mean, you could do this with Photoshop. It's just you require a significant amount of skills to do that. We developed a tool that allows me just to pull in person with bag, person without bag, 2 images. What do you say? What do you say to your what do you see? What do you say to your supervisor? That person no longer has a bag. So it's basic alertness, basic risk reporting, basic awareness. But what is a risk? What is a hazard? What should you do about it? Who should you report it to? But named individuals within your group. So every 6 months, I revamp that. We put new photographs on, and we've got a list of supervisors' names. You're working on this part of the site. Who do you call? What do you say?
That's
And
fantastic.
that really was, based on the experiences of the MEN bombing, was that you've got to have a confidence in reporting the right things and not overreacting to every situation, and to deal with things such as, if you see some litter, pick it up. Don't allow somebody to trip over it before you say, "Oh, I thought that was a risk." Do something about it, act upon it. Now, it came about, so we did some work with the American amusement industry, and 40% of all of their on-site accidents are trip, slips, and falls. And they can escalate. Trip, slips, and falls in a high-density crowd can become, mass fatality situations. So just identifying the small stuff, it helps to percolate this risk awareness and risk reporting throughout the organization. Now, that, Gary, can be very low cost, provided you've got the right kind of technology to deploy. And if you make it site specific, then you've now got a criterion to say that, well, you're not going to allow that company to work on your site unless they've done a basic risk awareness course. So low cost, site specific. We felt that was one of the ways to try and address some of the issues that we'd seen on sites, just awareness of high density crowds and complex sites. I'm also working with an AI company in Korea, after the Itaewon disaster, saying is that can we identify anything using, information, the artificial intelligence? And I said, yes, you can by looking at site plans, maps, diagrams, transport systems. There are ways in which you can identify geometric relationships on high density, high risk environments without having to be on site, without having to hook it up to cameras. Where's your transport hubs? Where's your center of attractions? Where are your nighttime economies developing? Where are the risks might develop in those sites? Can we identify a heat map, a hotspot map for potential overcrowding? So things like that are new and evolving. It's still an embryonic project, but when we do site-specific courses and, just put an online, and all I need to do is swap the photographs. What do you see? What do you say to your supervisor? It's the same question bank, but it's a different image for a different site. So one course, and that's why we can keep the costs really low. And, to a client to have that benefit, well, the benefits far outweigh the costs in those situations. But sometimes when you have to put staff on a day away for training, then there's a huge cost, an opportunity cost lost with that. That really can add up to the bottom line. So we looked at other better ways of doing an online course with your phone. What do you see? Oh yeah, I'm here. I can walk around the site and I can identify the locations because the client's already taken the pictures. So, a useful little technique that, we're working on. Well, we have training courses for that. We've deployed it. I mean, I think we've had about, a couple of hundred people through that for one site to trial it, and now they wanted it expanded. So seems to work, seems to fit the bill. But we're constantly evolving and developing ideas and concepts for getting risk awareness, risk reporting into the people that matter, the boots on the ground. And that's upskilling them. They're just what else can I do? How can I progress through the safety line of things? And that's always good for an organization to have that level of awareness at grassroots and to evolve and percolate through the entire organization.
That's moving it from, as we said right there, that's moving it from compliance to competence, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Which is the trajectory of the journey that, as I say, Gary and I are planning to try and push over this year. Gary.
Ian.
Yes, that's me. What have you got to say?
No.
Did it work for you?
That does work for me, but as I say, the biggest thing out there at the moment is venue operators. Your lower end of the market, your nighttime economy. These are the people which I'm having issues with in my realm. My corporate side, we've got a very similar thing which you put on. We use a WhatsApp group. Everyone's on the WhatsApp group. The area manager, the corporate place, is on the WhatsApp group. His manager on the WhatsApp groups. When my staff go through and do the site checks, everything's logged, photographs are taken, even down to toilet urinals, constantly flushing bits and pieces. They're very, very on point about it. Even to the ops manager went, blimey, you get all this stuff in. I said, yeah, but it's logged with you and then it's back onto you to deal with. So, on that side. But going back to the nighttime economy, this is one of the biggest issues in venues, such things. They don't want to spend that money. They don't want to do that site-specific things. We are trying to attempt to do it. I'm trying to attempt to do it, but it's my time, my effort, and I'm only doing it to cover my back at the end of the day because my name's on the paperwork. But this is one of the biggest issues which I'm finding in the nighttime economy.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. Cost is always the driver on these things. But like everything else, the cost of litigation far outweighs the cost of prevention and basic education and training, I think. Well, it could be that we're developing something close to an SIA license in terms of competency for risk awareness, risk reporting. But, like everything, you've got to have the idea, you've got to get traction within it, you've got to get a number of users to buy into it. It's never an easy route when you're starting to develop something new. And, I think we all know that from experience. But somebody's got to at least set the standards. Take that
Absolutely,
first
Keith.
step.
Keith, it's about leadership and what you're doing here. And as you know, I don't have anything to do. So, audience out there, And I'll put it exactly as it is. I have no reason to blow smoke up your ass because you're not going to be doing anything for me. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
true.
you are leadership. The leadership that this shows is really, really important. And these, in particular, really fascinating about this model. Now, we've probably got about 5 minutes left, and I just want to touch very quickly. There's a couple of interesting little bits. Lincoln Market was
Hmm.
cancelled. That was interesting, wasn't it? Because we spoke about that.
Yeah. Well, again, you make safety decisions based on your available information. I wasn't involved in the process this year, but I certainly know the team or knew the team. It's been a while since I was last there. Very competent. Would have done so for very good reasons. Lincoln's unique because of the castle, the nature of the castle itself, with a 4 meter entrance, 3 meter exit, and a one-way flowing
Yeah.
system. Which is all manageable because they do excellent jobs in monitoring. But then steep hill, it's called steep hill for a very good reason. It's steep, and has always been a potential for significant risk to life and limb, and therefore any consideration for crowd movement in built and complex spaces in city centres, particularly I think records showed it had about 250,000 visitors or so there. You can't take chances. I mean, look at what could go wrong, and you balance the risks of something going wrong compared to any mitigation measure you put in place. And, there are some unique elements within that. I think obviously the decision was made. I would reckon that the team that were making that, knowing them from past years, have all made a competent, coherent decision on it, balanced against the revenue that could have bring in. So it wouldn't have been taken lightly. It would have been taken, with a lot of due consideration on it. And I think whenever you're cancelling an event, the consideration against revenue has to be very carefully thought through. And they would have made the decision based on available information and evidence. So,
The last thing sorry, Gary, but this is one of my little bits. Is there was and I think you commented there was a piece written by Issa Murphy from the UK Crowd Management Association.
yeah.
I think it was entitled about crowd behaviour, and she was basically talking about Swifties. That apparently Swifties, Taylor Swift fans of Taylor Swift are like kind and wonderful people, and would don't push or rush and aren't mean at crowds. Yeah. Um, and I think there is a point, isn't it? Because you have football crowds completely different to rugby crowds, completely different to cricket crowds. You have, and my background from years is retail management, and so Marks and Sparks were always held up as the prime example because they trained their customers. And I can remember what they did is they used to have somebody come behind. If a customer picked up something and then put it down, they would have somebody then come down in front of them and fold it up and put it back to train their customers that when you're in Marks and Sparks, you have to behave in a different,
Yeah, yeah.
in a much more. Did you pick up any? Do you think there's anything in what East was saying?
Yeah, I mean, but again, you can shape expectations of behavior. I witnessed up in Murrayfield an event for Harry Styles where they knew the type of audience they'd have in, predominantly young females who'd be coming 2 days before. They put on a coordinated safety system, which was unbelievably efficient. There was welfare, there were, food and beverage, there was toilets laid out, big field behind it. It allowed people onto the site, the initial ticket check, they queued them into the right areas for the various pens in front of the stage for early arrivals. And as we come closer to the event, again, further ticket check, search, screening, constant communication between the crowd management team and the crowd to make sure that everybody was looked after and knew what was happening. And then as they pulled them in about 100 at a time, the instructions were, if you run, you go to the back of the queue. You're straight back into that pen. So everybody, two by two, walked very efficiently and cleanly because they knew the rules. And then, of course, as you get to the stadium, you're moving from the queuing area into the stadium. hold your hand up so we can see your wristband. The whole purpose for that wasn't to see the wristband. It's very difficult to run if you've got one arm in the air. So again, using psychology and techniques to make sure, and having the do not cross tape lines so that you could fill certain areas progressively and fill them evenly. Very, very efficient methodology there. And I recently worked some events up in Edinburgh for the City Council for Edinburgh Tattoo. And again, unique circumstances. Royal Mile's very steep entry point, castle in and out. So unique events that present some unique crowd challenges. And although the tattoo's been running for 70 years, they're still looking at how do we improve, and those kind of clients are always the really interesting ones to work with. How do we make it better? How do we improve the situation for something that's already working well? That's when you're working with a team that really understand risk and dynamics and want to learn more. So yeah, crowds can be conditioned to an environment. I liked Issy's article. She was one of my master's students. Excellent work. A high level, a very competent individual, and it's great to see her writing as well. So I've a lot of confidence in Issy, and certainly in her articles of production and the work that she did on Operation Feathers for the Queen's Q.
Yeah. So Gary, final questions from you?
I've got loads, but I know we've run out of time.
Well,
so
just ask your question, Gary. That's what you're here for.
I know that, but
Quick,
seriously, I've got a very long question, so we'll save it
ask
for another
it.
day.
Okay.
Ask it.
We'll save it for another day on that one, please. It's a long one.
All right then. Okay. Well, what can I do?
We're
We'll write it
lined
in.
up for episode 7 of the podcast.
Yeah. What do we have? Well, yes, we can't have you back. We say we only have you. We've got you contracted on a yearly basis, isn't it? Unless we can get you in for an emergency session. Listen, Gary, final words.
Final words. Crowd science is so important, or crowd safety, whichever way you want to look at it, is one of the most important issues which is out there. And it only takes for someone to make the wrong decision and not be competent or professional, have the idea where it goes wrong. And this is one of the things which I was going to ask, which we'll say for another day. It's always down to, as we said, that competent person. Are they competent and do they know what they're doing? And over the years, I've come across a lot of people who are not competent, who've been that close to losing things. So yeah, crowd science is very, very important for any event, any nightclub, retail park, or anything like that. People need to know what they're doing and have a full understanding of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm dealing with a case which will go unmentioned, but this individual has a lot of experience. But the question is, were they competent? A very important element to that. A huge difference between having experience and having competency. So I think I totally agree with you on that point, Gary. And we've all met a lot of people that have got a lot of experience, but are not necessarily competent. Just need to look at the condition of driving on the roads these days to understand that.
There you go. There you go.
Is there, final words then, Keith? Anything that final bits of advice for people to do? Get the app, by the way. But carry on.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a lot to try and up your knowledge. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of organizations that you can be joining, but even things like the free downloads, I think they're chargeable now. The Purple Guide, the Guide to Safety at Sports Ground, the USA Event Safety Guide, NFPA 101. A lot of documentation there that you can get hold of off the internet, previous versions, etc. Just read up. I mean, the information's there, but like every journey, you've got to take that first step towards it. You've got to understand there's a need and move towards improving competency. I think that's the word of the day.
It most certainly is. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think, all I can say is go and get the CrowdScan app. That is amazing. Let's try and support Keith by making sure that we ask for the kind of risk assessment protocols that he's mentioned earlier. I think that's fantastic. That work's got to be ongoing, and I know that we'll do everything that we can to push and support that, because as Keith Barnley said there, Gary said, this year for us in guest safety officer, lobby group, it's about pushing the drive from compliance to competency, because it's competency that saves lives, not a tick in a box. And on that happy note, it's time to say goodbye. See everybody.
One more thing.
Bye.
We go. One more thing. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. And if you want any more information regarding Keith, please drop us a direct message and we can put you in contact, because they do some excellent courses and very worthwhile doing.
And well said, Gary. Saying,
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you mentioned that, because obviously I wasn't going to, saying, because I'd forgotten. But then I am old.